Frank Sinatra knew presidents. Marilyn Monroe knew secrets. That alone should tell you something about how close Hollywood sat to real power. Not movie power, real power. The kind that runs nightclubs, unions, casinos, and backrooms where contracts are not always written down. The public saw glamour, the cameras saw charm. What they did not see were the quiet arrangements and the silent expectations that came with them. Some stars flirted with that world, some leaned into it, and some thought they could stand near it without getting burned. Let us count down the ones who learned the hard way. Number 15, James Caan. James Caan spent a lifetime denying that he was anything like the gangsters he played. And to be fair, he was not a mobster, he was an actor. But here is the thing. When you play Sonny Corleone in The Godfather and you move in circles that include real-life connected men, people start talking. Caan grew up in New York. He knew tough guys before Hollywood ever called. After The Godfather exploded, he became a symbol of mob cool. Real wise guys loved that. They invited him out. He showed up. He did not hide it. Photos surfaced of him socializing with men who were not exactly choir boys. That might sound harmless. It was not. The FBI watched those circles closely in the 70s and 80s, and when your name keeps popping up in the same rooms as organized crime figures, your reputation changes. Producers notice. Insurers notice. Studio executives get nervous. Not because you committed a crime, but because you look like risk. Caan insisted he was just friendly. Maybe he was. But Hollywood does not care about maybe. It cares about headlines and liability. He hit a rough stretch in the 80s, fewer leading roles, long gaps between films. Some of that was personal choice. Some of it was the industry deciding he came with baggage. He paid the price in whispers, installed momentum. In that subtle shift from leading man to character actor, nobody publicly punished him. Hollywood never does. It simply moves on to the next safer face. Number 14. Tony Darrow. Tony Darrow did not just brush against organized crime, he crossed a legal line. That is rare on this list. Most of these stars lived in the gray area. Darrow stepped into black and white. You know him from mob movies and television, small roles, tough guy energy. He fit the part because he understood the attitude. But in real life, he was pulled into a Gambino family extortion case. Not rumor, not gossip, federal charges. In 2009, Darrow pleaded guilty to his role in an extortion scheme tied to organized crime. That was it. The line between playing a gangster and working with one disappeared completely. He received probation, no dramatic prison sentence, but in Hollywood the damage was done. When an actor becomes part of a federal case, studios do not argue philosophy. They protect themselves. Roles dry up fast when your name appears in an indictment. Casting directors do not want to explain you to executives. Executives do not want to explain you to investors. Darrow paid the most obvious price here: legal exposure, public embarrassment, a career permanently stamped with something heavier than rumor. He proved something uncomfortable. Sometimes proximity turns into participation, and once that happens, there is no clean way back. Number 13, George Raft. George Raft did not pretend. That was his mistake. He came up through real New York nightclub culture where organized crime was not a secret, it was structure. When he reached Hollywood, he brought that loyalty with him. Raft socialized openly with major mob figures. He sat at their tables. He attended their events. He treated those relationships as part of his identity. Early on it helped. He became the go-to tough guy. Authentic, convincing. Studios loved it. Then America changed. After World War II, federal investigations into organized crime intensified. Suddenly, those old friendships did not look colorful. They looked dangerous. Insurance companies hesitated. Studios worried about heat. Raft refused to cooperate with authorities and refused to distance himself from men he considered friends. That loyalty cost him. He began losing roles, not overnight, slowly. Leading parts slipped away. Younger actors with cleaner reputations stepped in. Raft turned down The Godfather years later, which would have revived everything. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness. Either way, his power faded. By the end of his life, he was nearly broke. The men he once stood beside did not rescue him. The studios did not feel obligated to protect him. He learned the hardest lesson on this list. Borrowed power feels real until the day it stops answering your calls. And when it stops, you are standing alone. Number 12. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was not subtle. That is what makes his story fascinating. He did not hide his friendships with powerful mob figures in the 40s and 50s. He attended parties. He performed at mob-connected venues. He called some of those men friends. In that era, the nightclub circuit and organized crime were deeply intertwined. If you wanted the best rooms in Vegas or certain cities, you did not go through polite paperwork. You went through people who controlled access. Early on, that connection helped him. When his career dipped in the early 50s, he fought his way back. But whispers followed him everywhere. The FBI kept files, thick ones, phone taps, surveillance, photographs, not because he was proven to be committing crimes, because proximity mattered. Then came politics. Sinatra believed he could move comfortably between Hollywood glamour and national power. His friendship with John F. Kennedy felt like proof. But when Robert Kennedy began aggressively targeting organized crime, that friendship became a liability. Overnight, Sinatra was no longer an asset. He was a risk. He paid the price in humiliation, public distance, invitations that vanished, political access that evaporated. He was furious when the Kennedys cut him off to avoid the appearance of mob ties. Furious because loyalty in that world was supposed to mean something. He survived, he thrived, but the shadow never left. He spent decades proving he was more than the company he kept. That is the price. When you get too close to organized power, you never fully control your own narrative again. It controls you. Number 11. Lana Turner. Lana Turner did not flirt with organized crime influence. She collided with it. Her relationship with Johnny Stompanato was not glamorous. It was violent. Stompanato was tied to Mickey Cohen and the Los Angeles underworld. Inside Hollywood, that was common knowledge. He was volatile, controlling, dangerous. Turner's friends saw bruises. Studio executives knew something was wrong. Here is the part that makes this ugly. The studio did not rescue her. It contained her. As long as the abuse stayed private, the box office remained safe. That was the calculation. Public scandal was worse than private fear. Everything exploded in April 1958. Stompanato confronted Turner at her home. During the fight, her teenage daughter Cheryl Crane stabbed him. He died on the floor of a Beverly Hills mansion. Suddenly, the underworld was not whispered about. It was front-page news. The killing was ruled justifiable homicide. Legally, she survived. Professionally, she paid. Insurance companies raised concerns. Scripts changed. Her reputation shifted from glamorous star to volatile headline. She became risk. She continued acting. She delivered strong performances. But the industry never treated her as untouchable again. That is how Hollywood punishes you. Not with exile, with caution. Turner lived for decades after, but she carried the shadow of that night forever. She learned something brutal. Getting close to men backed by organized crime does not require you to commit a crime. It only requires you to be within reach when things turn violent. And once blood is involved, the system protects itself first, not you. Number 10, Dean Martin. Dean Martin looked like he floated through life. Drink in hand, half smile. Nothing rattled him. That was the image. No, the truth was sharper. Martin built his career inside the Las Vegas machine, and Las Vegas in the 50s and 60s was not some neutral playground. Casinos were controlled, showrooms were controlled, bookings were controlled, organized crime influence was baked into the system. If you were headlining those rooms, you were operating inside that ecosystem, whether you admitted it or not. Martin benefited from it. Premium slots, reliable paydays, smooth operations, problems that vanished before they became public. That does not happen by accident. It happens because powerful people want the show to go on. But access comes with expectation. You do not embarrass the owners. You do not challenge the structure. You do not pretend you do not know who is really running things. Martin played the game well. He stayed cool. He did not make noise. That was survival. The price was invisible but real. Federal scrutiny, association, being forever linked to a system that the public pretended was glamorous, but the government considered criminal. Once your name is tied to that network, it never fully detaches. Martin never had a dramatic collapse. That is not how this works. His cost was conditional freedom. He thrived as long as he stayed inside boundaries. The image of effortless cool was camouflage, and camouflage is something you wear when you know the terrain is dangerous. Number 9. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was the most talented man in almost every room he entered, and still he had to navigate rooms where he was not in control. Like Martin, he dominated the Vegas circuit, but for Davis, the stakes were higher. He was black in an era where racism was not subtle. Organized crime controlled many of the venues. Power in those rooms did not come from applause, it came from ownership. Davis understood the hierarchy. He performed brilliantly on stage and then had to calculate every step off it. Which doors he could use, which jokes were safe, which powerful men required deference. Being close to mob-influenced venues meant protection and pressure at the same time. He benefited from proximity. He also endured it. When your livelihood depends on people who operate outside the law, you learn quickly that fairness is not part of the agreement. You stay useful. You stay entertaining. You do not disrupt the flow of money. The price Davis paid was psychological, constant compromise, constant calculation. He survived and succeeded but never fully controlled the rooms that made him rich. So that tension wears on you. Hollywood loves the Rat Pack mythology, the laughter, the swagger, the cool. What it ignores is that those stages were not neutral territory. Davis had to be brilliant and careful at the same time. That balancing act was survival, and survival in that environment always comes at a cost. Number 8, Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was not just famous, she was access, and in early 1960s, Hollywood access was currency. By the time Monroe reached the peak of her fame, she was moving through circles that overlapped entertainment, power, political power, and underworld money, Las Vegas connections, wealthy financiers, men who funded hotels, casinos, and campaigns at the same time. You did not always see the structure, but it was there. Quiet, expensive, connected. Monroe did not need to be part of organized crime to feel its gravity. She only needed to be valuable in rooms where influence operated off the record. People introduced her. People used her image. People leveraged her proximity to politicians and power brokers. When those networks overlapped with mob-linked financiers, it created something unstable. She began expressing fear late in her life. Fear of being watched, fear of phone taps, fear of being discarded once she became inconvenient. Some of that paranoia may have been personal struggle, some of it may have been rational. When you exist in rooms where secrets are currency, you become dangerous simply by knowing things. Here's the hard part. Monroe was isolated, studios were frustrated with her, political allies distanced themselves. The powerful men who once wanted to be seen near her stepped back when visibility became risky. Organized influence does not like exposure, it likes discretion. When she died in 1962, the official story arrived quickly. Too quickly for some. Questions lingered, timelines blurred, records contradicted one another. Even if you strip away every extreme theory, what remains is still tragic. She was a star caught between forces larger than her and abandoned when those forces no longer found her useful. She paid the price in loneliness and instability, not in a courtroom, not in a shootout, in something slower. When power prefers silence, the most vulnerable person in the room is often the most visible one, and Marilyn was always visible. Number 7, Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was transformed into an icon so completely that people forgot she was constructed. Her hairline altered, her name changed, her background softened. She became fantasy, and fantasy attracts ownership. In the 1940s, she moved in elite social circles that blended Hollywood wealth, international money, and nightlife power. Those spaces were not always clean. Organized crime influence hovered around high-end clubs, casinos, and certain financiers who blurred legality with glamour. Hayworth did not need to sit down with mob bosses to be affected. She only needed to be valuable. Powerful men believed proximity to her enhanced their status. She was photographed with them, seen at parties, attached to names that carried influence. In that era, influence often meant leverage. Her marriages reflected imbalance, control masked as romance, protection disguised as possession. When you are treated like the most desirable woman in the world, your autonomy can quietly shrink. Decisions get made around you. Narratives get shaped without you. She paid the price not in scandal, but in erosion. Her personal life became chaotic. Her mental health deteriorated. Later, Alzheimer's disease complicated everything, but long before diagnosis, she was described as unstable and unreliable. Hollywood framed her as fragile rather than acknowledging the system that consumed her. Glamour did not protect her, it advertised her. In rooms where organized money mingled with studio power, beauty was not armor, it was currency. Rita Hayworth did not openly defy mob influence. She did not expose it. She existed inside a structure that treated her as a prized asset. And when assets begin to falter, they are quietly replaced. Her price was slow and psychological. The loss of control, the rewriting of her identity, being remembered more as a symbol than a person. That is how power punishes without ever raising its voice. Number 6. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner did not fit the mold. That alone made her dangerous in mid-century Hollywood. She was loud when silence was expected. She drank openly. She fought publicly. She did not apologize for occupying space. In an industry that depended on carefully managed women, she refused to be managed. Gardner moved through international nightlife scenes that overlapped heavily with gambling money and casino interests. Spain, Las Vegas, high-end European clubs, those spaces were rarely free of organized crime influence. Sometimes it was direct ownership. Sometimes it was silent investment. Either way, the power structure behind the velvet curtain was rarely clean. She dated powerful men, married powerful men, socialized in rooms where influence was traded like currency. You did not have to sign a contract to be inside the system. You only had to show up and accept the benefits. The benefits were real. Luxury, protection, access. So were the expectations. Gardner did not like being told what to do. That created friction everywhere. With studios, with partners, with men who believed proximity to her meant control. When she pushed back, she was labeled unstable, difficult, reckless. In that era, those labels were lethal to a woman's career. Organized influence does not always punish loudly. It isolates. Projects slow down. Insurance concerns appear. Scripts change direction. You are still famous, but you are no longer first choice. Gardner's career never collapsed, but it narrowed. The industry treated her as volatile rather than valuable. She paid the price in reputation, in being framed as chaos rather than independence, in watching doors close because she would not conform to expectations set by men who controlled rooms she did not own. Gardner survived. She lived long enough to see her legend become simplified into the wild beauty who burned too bright. But the truth is harsher. She lived inside systems that rewarded compliance and penalized resistance. Her refusal to play obedient did not destroy her. It limited her. And in Hollywood, limitation can feel like exile. Number 5. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart built his image on defiance, the man who would not bend. The man who stared power in the face and did not blink. On screen, it was iconic. Off screen, it was complicated. Bogart came up in a studio system that intersected with labor disputes, union control, and nightlife circuits, where organized crime influence was never far away. You could not operate in major cities without brushing against that infrastructure. Clubs were controlled. Distribution networks were influenced. Even certain union battles had underworld fingerprints. Bogart was not known as a mob ally. He was known as stubborn, politically outspoken, resistant to authority. He publicly challenged studio decisions and stood against certain political pressure campaigns in the late 1940s. That independence was admirable, but it was not comfortable for executives trying to maintain smooth relationships with every power structure in town. When you resist too loudly, the system does not necessarily destroy you, it manages you. Bogart remained a star because his talent demanded it, but the margins tightened. Roles were negotiated harder. His public activism drew scrutiny from groups that were not fond of Hollywood actors speaking out. The price he paid was subtle: pressure, surveillance, being labeled difficult in ways that limited leverage behind the scenes, in an industry intertwined with financial interests that preferred stability. Defiance was risk. Bogart survived because he was bankable. But even legends feel constraint. He operated inside a web of influence that tolerated independence only as long as it did not disrupt larger alliances. The myth says he stood alone against corruption. The reality is he navigated it carefully enough to keep working. His cost was structural, a career shaped by boundaries he could not fully see but definitely felt. That is how power works in Hollywood. It does not always crush you. Sometimes it simply reminds you who really owns the room. Number 4. Judy Garland. Judy Garland did not need to chase organized crime influence. It surrounded the industry she depended on. By the late 1940s, she was one of the most famous women in America. Her voice filled theaters, her face sold tickets. But fame and control are not the same thing. Live entertainment in that era ran through powerful booking circuits, major cities, major venues, and many of those pipelines were influenced by promoters with underworld ties. You did not always see the muscle, you felt it. Contracts were tight, percentages were unclear, expenses ballooned. If you canceled a show, there were consequences that did not look like polite legal disputes. Garland was fragile by then. Years of studio pressure, stimulants, exhaustion, financial instability, that vulnerability made her easy to corner. When she toured, she filled rooms and generated enormous revenue, yet she was often left in debt. Fees were structured against her. Management deals worked in favor of others. Friends said she was terrified of letting people down, terrified of losing venues, terrified of angering promoters who controlled access. In an ecosystem where powerful men could quietly shut doors that fear was not irrational. She paid the price in exhaustion and collapse. Canceled shows became headlines. Headlines became proof of instability. Instability became justification for tighter control. It was a vicious cycle. By the time she died in 1969, she was still beloved, but financially strained and physically destroyed. Garland's story is not about dramatic mob retaliation. It is about economic entrapment, about an artist too valuable to release and too vulnerable to protect herself. In a system where organized influence helped shape the rules, she was treated like a revenue stream first and a human second. That cost her everything. Number 3, Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow burned fast, too fast. She became Hollywood's platinum blonde fantasy in the early 1930s. She was glamorous, profitable, marketable, and young enough to be controlled. The Hollywood party circuit of that era was not innocent. Gambling rooms, fixers, wealthy investors whose money did not always come from clean businesses, organized crime influence seeped into nightlife and financing. Stars did not need to sign contracts with mob figures, they only needed to be present in those rooms. Harlow's husband, Paul Byrne, died in 1932, under circumstances ruled a suicide but immediately surrounded by rumor. The studio moved quickly. Statements were controlled, narratives sealed. That speed fed suspicion for decades. MGM protected its asset fiercely. Protection sometimes means burying complications before they grow. After Byrne's death, Harlow remained valuable but increasingly surrounded by volatile men and controlled environments. Her health deteriorated rapidly in 1937. Symptoms were downplayed, work schedules continued, production pressures overrode medical caution. Was organized crime directly responsible for her death? No documented proof says that. But the ecosystem around her was one where power operated behind curtains, where money moved through channels not always visible, where protecting image outweighed protecting people. She died at 26. The studio shaped the farewell, the questions lingered. Harlow paid the price in being too profitable to slow down, in being caught in an era where powerful interests overlapped and a young actress had little agency. Her tragedy is less about one criminal act and more about a system where image and influence mattered more than life. In that world, proximity to shadow power was normal. And normal does not mean safe. Number 2, Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre built a career playing hunted men, nervous, cornered, watching the door. By the late 1940s, that tension did not feel like performance anymore. Lorre came to Hollywood with real talent and a distinct face that casting directors loved. But he never became a clean leading man. He became atmosphere, suspicion, edge. That meant steady work, but not steady security. Add medical problems and a growing dependency on pain medication, and you have vulnerability. And vulnerability attracts the wrong kind of help. Hollywood, in that era, did not rely only on banks. Money flowed through private channels, gambling rooms, backers who fronted cash quietly, men who operated around nightclubs and booking offices. If an actor needed fast money and did not want public records, there were always options. Miss a payment and you do not get sued first. You get squeezed, rumors start, insurance concerns appear, you are suddenly labeled unreliable, casting becomes harder in a town built on reputation that is enough to push someone to the margins. Friends described Lorre as paranoid later in life. convinced he was being watched, afraid of people following him. Some of that may have been illness, some may have been stress, but in an industry where intimidation was not unheard of, his fear was not absurd. He tried leaving Hollywood. Europe, stage work, distance, but distance does not erase leverage. So when your financial life is entangled with private lenders, the pressure travels. He paid the price in instability, in fewer substantial roles. In becoming the industry's favorite label for problem actors, difficult, unpredictable, he died in 1964 at 59. Brilliant, respected, and worn down. Laurie did not die in a hail of bullets. He paid in erosion, in anxiety, in watching opportunity narrow because he had leaned on systems that were never built to protect him. Number 1 would show you James Cagney. James Cagney did not cozy up to organized crime. He confronted power. That was enough. In the 1930s, Hollywood labor disputes were vicious. Studios fought unions, unions fought studios, and organized crime influence bled into some of those conflicts, especially in cities where labor control meant money and leverage. Cagney was outspoken. He pushed for better treatment. He supported union efforts. And he refused to be silent when executives wanted quiet compliance. That stance made him admired by some and resented by others. He reportedly received threats during tense labor battles, pressure not to speak, pressure not to align publicly with certain causes. In an era where intimidation could be subtle but effective, that pressure mattered. Cagney did not fold, but he felt consequences. Studios branded him difficult at times. He battled over contracts. He temporarily left Warner Brothers in disputes that were not purely creative. Standing firm cost him momentum and comfort. Here is why he sits at number 1, because he represents the other side of this story. Not the star who leaned into mob proximity. The star who refused to bend inside an industry where organized influence and studio muscle overlapped more often than the public realized. He survived, he thrived eventually. But not without strain, not without stalled projects and reputational friction. Cagney paid the price for resistance. He learned that in Hollywood, you do not have to break the law to feel pressure from those who operate outside it. You only have to threaten the balance. And when you threaten the balance, the room gets very quiet. Hollywood never admits how close the shadows sit to the spotlight. Fame looks powerful until you see who really controls the rooms. Some of these stars leaned in, some resisted. Some just stood too close. None walked away untouched. And in this town, power is never free. It always collects something.